Okay, everybody, I think we're about to start. Welcome to our weekly Parsha class. This week we are studying Parasha Vayishlach, and we're right in the drama of the Jacob stories. Last week we spoke a little bit about or I'm sure you studied a little bit about Jacob's dream and the ladder. It's a famous story of which he dreamt of angels ascending and descending a ladder and all of the implications and interpretations of that dream. But I wanted to speak about this week. I wanted to brainstorm a little bit about the second dream he has. So, first of all, just a quick summary. Like I said, this follows the story of Jacob and his family. And in his dream, he wrestles with an unnamed figure, which is interesting that the figure isn't named. But he has this dream in the midst of an episode in which he is preparing to reunite with his brother Esav. And that is really the impetus, I believe, for the dream. And we'll speak a little bit more about this. He's supposed to reunite with Esav. And if you remember, they didn't have the best relationship. And we'll get into some of the reasons as to why that was. The remainder of the Parsha speaks about Jacob's daughter Dinah, the rape of Dinah, also a very famous story. The response of Dinah's brothers to that rape. The Parsha also speaks about Rachel's death as she gives birth to Jacob's youngest child, Benjamin. So what I want to do is read a few of the verses that speaks towards the dream itself. And then I want to give you three different takes and three different lessons on the dream itself. And really that relationship with between Jacob and his brother Esav, which I think every single one of us can relate to a fraught relationship, whether it's between siblings, between best friends, a parent, a child, a spouse, a partner. Trying to reconcile a relationship that means so very much to us. And if you kind of think about the expression staying up all night or it keeps us up at night, I believe that's what happened with Jacob, that this relationship that meant so much to him in various layers that we'll get into kept him up at night. So listen to the verses and see if you agree. ותעבור המנחה על פניו והוא לם בלילה הוא במחנה. ויקום בלילה הוא ויקח את שתי נשיו, את שתי שפחותיו ואת 11 ילדיו ויעבור את מעבר יבוק. So what Jacob did is he sent gifts forward to Esav, trying to appease him, thinking that, okay, if I send some gifts ahead before I reunite with my brother, maybe that will help kind of ease this, I don't know, tension that has built up over the years. So the gift went on ahead, but Jacob remained in camp that night. And the same night he arose, he took his two wives, his two maidservants, his 11 sons, and he crossed the ford of the Yabok. And after taking all of them across the stream, he sent for his possessions. And then here is the story that we're really going to get into. Jacob was left alone, and a figure wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And really, I know you don't see kind of the title of my text study here, but my title is, this is a class about wrestling, not physical wrestling, a little bit, but emotional and spiritual wrestling. A figure wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And when Jacob saw that he had not, when the angel saw, we say maybe it's an angel or an unnamed figure, that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the other, "What's your name?" And he replied, Yaakov, Jacob. But this unnamed figure said to Jacob, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human and have prevailed." But Jacob pushed forward and asked, "Pray tell me your name." But the unnamed figure said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of him there. And Yaakov named the place Peniel, meaning I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved. So I asked this question beforehand. Why is he having this dream? Why do we have dreams in general? And I can get into an entirely, psychological, psychoanalytical tangent on this. But I really do believe in this instance, Jacob's having a dream because he is so scared about reuniting with his brother. And in fact, if you look through the verses of this Parsha, and I'm exploring it a little bit this upcoming Shabbat, you will see that you'll see the words used that Jacob is afraid. And often when we see those words, yirah in the Torah, it's meant to speak about awe, being in awe of God, or fearing God. But that's kind of awe or fear of God's great power or kind of awesome nature. Here in this parsha, when we speak about fear, it's actually speaking about Jacob physically, mentally, emotionally being afraid of his brother and what his brother might do to him for good reason. That I'll explain in a little bit. Um, and then it even speaks about Jacob's anxiety. You usually hear about the Torah speaking about anxiety, but that's exactly what it says, that Jacob was anxious in meeting his brother. And so he has this dream, I think, to wrestle with kind of those inner demons. Will his brother embrace him? Will his brother come kind of bearing arms and be ready to fight and to kill him? So it's significant that he's alone, he goes to sleep, and he wrestles an unnamed figure. Be very different, I think, if it was named. We might be able to figure out exactly who it is, but it's an unnamed figure. Okay, so here is an interesting commentary essay by Rabbi Rick Jacobs, president of the Union for Reform Judaism. And this is what he says about this encounter. He writes, Jacob is panicked about reuniting with his brother Esav, whom he has such a difficult relationship. And he once again goes to find a place and goes to sleep. But as many of us know, with the night before a very difficult or anticipated encounter, he doesn't get much sleep. Think about the night before a major holiday, or I don't know, that's in terms of reunions, but you can even think about the night before a big presentation, or, when you were a student, the night before a big test. What kinds of dreams usually, or nightmares, enter your psyche? And Jacobs continues, we're told in the midst of his sleep that someone comes and wrestles with him. We're not really sure what it is that transpires. Was there another person? Is there an angel? Is he wrestling with his own conscience, trying to come to peace with how he handled his brother? But the text tells us that they wrestled. And in that encounter, physically, Jacob is changed. His name is changed. His sense of self is changed. His destiny is changed. He becomes Israel, which is translated as one who wrestles with God and human beings and prevails. When he wakes up in the morning, he's about to face his brother. He gets so nervous that he sends members of his family to the front to butter up his brother with all of these gifts and wonderful kinds of um, uh, offerings. But it turns out, says Jacobs, that their reuniting moment is nothing like what he had feared. Does that sound familiar? How many times do we build up a situation and think to ourselves, this is just going to be awful? And in a way, it feels like it can't be anything but awful because of the picture we've painted for ourselves. But in reality, it's not that bad. So he reunites with his brother Esav, who we remember from years back when they were children. He's the muscular, athletic soul who is, according to Jacobs, not really interested in the finer things of life. But it turns out in this encounter, the encounter is one where they not only embrace, but they kiss. Now, what Jacob says, I want to emphasize in a moment, and I'll end with Jacobs in a second. He says, and of course, the commentators, the rabbinic commentators, can't believe that Esav is really taken to this emotional place and kisses his brother. They say, no, no, no. He really bites him. And I believe if you open up your Chumash, or if you have a chance to look in the Torah, you'll see kind of markings on top of the word, and they kissed, because the commentators really couldn't handle the idea that that these two polar opposites, good and bad, evil and righteous, which is how they are portrayed really throughout the commentaries and even in the Torah, that there was a chance for that kind of reconciliation to happen. So how could they really have kissed? Was it really kissing? Was it really embracing that kind of loving reunion? The commentators say no, that really Esau bit Jacob's neck. But Jacob's doesn't believe that. He actually believes that he can be a generous, open-hearted person. And Jacob's last kind of takeaway, which I think is really interesting, is that this could be a Parsha. This could be a lesson that we focus on even during the High Holy Days. Because during the High Holy Days, we often speak about introspection and the ways we want to change and the ways we want to grow. But imagine thinking to yourself, who is it? Who is it that I'm estranged from? Who is it? Whose picture comes to mind when I think of built up tension and when I think of the anxiety and fear I have if I were to see that person again? Someone with whom I was very close with. Remember, Esau and Jacob, they were twins, very, very close. And yet, and you'll see it in my second and third lesson, what Jacob does to his brother, and then in return, what Esau does to Jacob, it just pulls them apart. And one might say to themselves, there's no possible way that kind of relationship could have any kind of repair. But Jacob says, no, quite the opposite. Rabbi Rick Jacob says quite the opposite, that reunion and reconciliation and repair is possible even in the most trying of circumstances. So that's lesson number one, that reunions and healthy reunions are possible. And don't look at that embrace and that kiss between brothers as something that is nefarious, but rather look at that embrace and kiss between brothers as an opening for yourself, that same kind of reunion and embrace might be possible with someone with whom you thought repair is not possible. I love that the Torah gives us that kind of hope. Okay, lesson number two. And for lesson number two, it's a teaser into what I'm going to speak about this upcoming Shabbat. So feel free to either, if you're local, come to Sinai Temple for services this upcoming Shabbat. You're always welcome to come, or to listen online. But Rabbi Sachs speaks about the wrestling that Jacob does in his dream is not necessarily wrestling with another person, but the idea that Jacob is wrestling with himself. That's actually a very common commentary, that Jacob is wrestling with himself. But Rabbi Sachs elevates the commentary and elevates that idea that the reason why Jacob is wrestling with himself is because he actually wants what Esau has, and even more so, he wants to be Esau. Now that sounds so strange. Why would he want to be his brother? Some of the proof texts that Rabbi Sachs gives us is that when Jacob's name is changed to Israel, it's not just that Jacob's name was changed by removing a letter or adding a letter, the same way that we see with Avram or we see with Sarai into Abraham or Sarah. But Jacob receives an entirely new name. And if you heard me when I was saying the verses, both names are used for Jacob. It's almost like they're interchangeable. Yaakov and Yisrael, he receives a new name, which might suggest that there is a desire for a change in personality or a change of character, that Jacob, in a way, or at least in his dreamlike stance, understands that he can't stay the same stubborn, if you will, jealous man that he has been up until this point, always wanting what his brother has, or if you will, wanting to be his brother. So I'm going to read a little bit about what Rabbi Sachs says about this. He says, in terms of Jacob receiving an additional name, this is just one mystery among many when it comes to Jacob's character and his relationship with his brother Esau. So difficult it is to understand the stories about them. to make sense of them. They have been overlaid in Jewish tradition with a thick layer of midrash, that Esau is almost perfectly evil and Jacob almost perfectly righteous. I'm skipping a little bit, but what he says is, think about what the name Jacob signifies. It's the name he acquired because he was born holding on to his brother Esau's heel. That was consistently Jacob's posture during the key events of his early life. He bought his brother's birthright. He wore his brother's clothes. At his mother's request, he took his brother's blessing. And then when asked by his father, "Who are you, my son?" he replied, "I'm Esau, your firstborn." Says Rabbi Sachs, Jacob was the man who wanted to be Esau. Why so? Because Esau had one thing that Jacob did not have. What was that? His father's love. His father Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, says the text, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And so the wrestling and the kind of second lesson that we glean from this text is that Jacob wasn't wrestling with another figure. That's not what he was doing. He was wrestling with himself, trying to contend with the fact that he wasn't meant to attain what Esau had in his lifetime. And he wasn't meant to take on Esau's character or take on Esau's place in the world. Jacob was wrestling with these parts of himself that he knew really not just wasn't meant to be, but was kind of an ugly part of himself. And so the lesson that I believe Rabbi Sachs leaves us with is, don't long to be someone else. Whether it's your brother or your partner or a best friend or a neighbor, don't long to be someone else. In this world, only long to be you. That kind of wrestling should happen every single day. The wrestling that takes place in understanding who you are, not in comparison to someone else, but in comparison to the facets of your own soul. Finally, a third question that I want us to contend with this morning. Once you understand who you are, now, I don't know if anyone fully understands who we are or who you are, but that's a constant, like I said, wrestling that we do. But as we are trying to understand who we are, what is it that we are meant to give to those we love? Or what is it that we're meant to offer this world? And this commentary comes from Rabbi Rachel Steiner. And she says the following. I think it's quite beautiful. She says that Elie Wiesel teaches that Jacob wrestles at night with the parts of himself that he likes and the parts of himself that he doesn't like. That family reunions, as we said, take a lot of work. Not just the food, the effort, the travel, and safety plans, but also the preparing ourselves from the inside out. She says that the word mincha comes up a lot in our portion. That word means offering and refers to the gifts that Jacob brought to his brother. But when he is face to face with Esau, at the end of their meeting, Jacob uses a different word and calls his gift not a mincha, but a bracha, a blessing. This change in language is significant. Jacob was able to transform his gifts from ordinary offerings into blessings. Jacob was at his worst when he was taking the blessing that was not rightfully his. But now Jacob, at the end of this story, is at his best when he gives bracha, blessing, to his brother. And Esau is at his best when his initial response is to tell his brother that gifts aren't necessary, and he kisses him instead. In the exchange of blessings, the brothers join in the sacred dance of giving and receiving. How can we do, she asks, what Jacob did and transform our ordinary offerings into blessings that are imbued with holiness and intention? And that's what I want to leave you with this morning. Disclosure. My children are telling me the kinds of gifts they want for Hanukkah. It's natural. That's what everyone's talking about. And some of the conversations, although it's very hard for a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and an 8-year-old to hear this, but we're discussing in our home. And discussing here today and in the synagogue, that yes, material gifts are lovely. When you exchange material gifts with someone else, that is also a sign of care and adoration. But the real gift that we can give our loved ones, and I'm not saying don't buy someone a gift. Go ahead and do what you need to do. But the real gift that we can give our loved ones and each other, I believe, is determining how we can be unique blessings in this world. That maybe there's a reason why those two dreams, Jacob's dreams, are back to back in the Torah. We see Jacob in one dream um, imagining a ladder that reaches higher. And then we see Jacob um, dreaming about wrestling an angel, and that takes place on the ground. And I think that is really the balance that we're trying to achieve in our lives. That sometimes we're reaching higher, but most of the time we're on the ground and we're wrestling with ourselves and we're wrestling with our relationships and we're wrestling with who we are meant to be in this world, what we're meant to offer, and the blessings that we're supposed to give. So I hope this morning you've enjoyed really wrestling with the Parsha and discovering a few different lessons with me. When you think of Jacob and Esau, like I said, we often think of this good and evil dichotomy, that Jacob was always striving for what Esau had, and that in a way he deserved it because Esau is described, as this truly dangerous and terrible person. But when we dig deeper, we see, number one, that reunions and relationships that are struggling, that there's still hope for repair. That's number one. Um, we learn that we should be in constant wrestling with the different facets of our soul, trying not to be someone else, but really striving to be ourselves. And then finally, uh, transforming mincha to bracha. We each have blessings to offer this world, and it's up to you to figure out what they are and how and when you'll give them. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful morning.